Eu queria que você, Glenn, contasse um pouco da história mesmo concreta da sua descoberta desse grande furo de reportagem, né? Você é um jornalista muito conhecido já no mundo anglo-saxão, tinha um blog, publicava em diversos jornais. E qual foi o momento em que as coisas apareceram na sua frente, né? E eu queria que você falasse também um pouco do Edward Snowden e da Laura Poitras, que são dois personagens que deveriam estar aqui conosco nessa mesa, conversando sobre esse assunto. Como foi que, primeira vez, você entrou em contato com a sua história?
Well, the context is actually interesting. I mean, I've told the story so many times of, when is the first time that I kind of was contacted by Edward Snowden, but I think the context for it is a little bit more interesting even, and I'm actually sitting here thinking about it now because Charles and I talked a little bit last night, and when we found out that our moderator was not going to be here, we didn't know if we were even going to have a moderator, and we were wondering, well, what are we going to do? We're going to just get up there and be two guys talking. And at first we thought, it's a little strange. Why are we on a panel together? Because Charles's work, with Inside Job has been about the financial system, and mine has been about foreign policy and national security and terrorism. And I was a lawyer before that, so to some extent the law. And it seems like there's, no real connection. And as Charles just alluded to, I mean, what he just described happening in the United States, which is that the most powerful economic actors in America, by far, Wall Street executives, tycoons, people who fund those campaigns he's talking about, who own the government, who control it, committed such egregious crimes that hundreds of millions, probably billions of people around the world, including in this country, were seriously harmed by that financial collapse that wasn't like a hurricane or a tornado, it was criminality. And yet none of them, as Charles said, has been punished, not a single one. And then you look at the crimes that the most powerful American political actors have committed over the last decade, not just torture, but invading and destroying a country of 26 million people based on utter lies told to the world, or kidnapping and rendering people who have been charged with no crimes to the worst human rights abusers to be tortured, or putting people in cages in the middle of an ocean thousands of miles away from their home for more than a decade now without any due process, charging them with a crime, spying on the world. You look at all of these crimes and none of those people have been punished as well, even though there's a treaty that virtually every country on the earth is a party to called the Convention Against Torture that says any country that finds within it people who have tortured other people are required to prosecute them, and there is no defense. And we've prosecuted none of our torturers, the United States hasn't, or any of those other crimes. And so on the one hand, you see the most powerful people in the most powerful country in the world committing the most extreme crimes, literally, that harm hundreds of millions, if not billions of people around the world, paying no consequences whatsoever. And so then you could say, well, maybe that's just because the United States sort of is a lenient place when it comes to criminals. They don't like to punish criminals. The reality, though, is exactly the opposite. The United States imprisons more of its citizens by far than any other country in the world, not just proportionally, but in absolute numbers. Even though China and India have many times more of the population than the United States, there are more people in American prisons than any other country in the world. In fact, the United States is only 5% of the world's population. This is an amazing statistic. The United States is 5% of the world's population. 5% of the people on the globe are American, and yet 25% of all people in prison in the world are imprisoned in the United States. And so at the very same time that we have invested the most powerful people in our country with the right to commit the worst crimes with no punishment of any sort, at the very same time we imprison more of our ordinary powerless citizens for trivial crimes, for things that in a lot of other countries they're not even punished for longer jail terms under harsher prison conditions. And that is the definition of an inherently corrupt society, where how you're treated is determined not by what you do, but by who you are and how much power you have. It is a complete subversion of the rule of law. And so when you look at somebody like Edward Snowden and you think to yourself, why would somebody like him, who is 29 years old and has an excellent career and makes a lot of money and has a girlfriend who he loves and who loves him and a family who supports him, why would he do something seemingly so extreme and so radical, like take many tens of thousands of documents that are marked top secret from his own government and give them to journalists to disclose? The answer, an important part of that answer, is because he looked at all the things that we've just talked about and said, I think this system has become grossly corrupt. It is out of control, acting without limits, harming people at will, without any consequences. And I, as a human being, feel compelled to do something about this, because I don't want to live the rest of my life knowing that I could have done something about it and failed to do so. And the fact that he sought out people like me and Laura Poitras, rather than going to the New York Times or established journalistic outlets, is reflective of the fact that in the United States, our largest media outlets have become part of that system, have endorsed it and have enabled it. If you look at the American attack on Iraq, you can't understand why it happened without realizing that every day our biggest news outlets like the New York Times and NBC News and the Washington Post published one article after the next, bolstering these lies and endorsing them and failing to investigate them. And so I think what you're seeing, not just with Edward Snowden, but Chelsea Manning and a lot of other people who are starting to engage in more radical dissent, is this realization that this system is fundamentally corrupt. And it's important because it happens to be the most powerful country on earth still, and that corruption harms huge numbers of people. And the institutions that are supposed to exist to fight against it, the Justice Department, the Congress, the media, the courts, are controlled by the very same factions that are engaging in this corruption, and therefore are completely incapable or unwilling to act to stop it. And that's why somebody like Edward Snowden feels motivated to take more radical action. I think it's a reflection of the fact that there's systemic failure on the part of American institutions.
E qual a situação do Snowden hoje? Ele continua na Rússia, ele tem esse pedido encaminhado ao Brasil, que o Brasil dizia que não tinha sido encaminhado, depois o ministro falou que não ia ser concedido o asilo e, portanto, o pedido foi encaminhado. Eu queria saber qual a situação dele hoje em termos de asilo e o que você pensa da maneira como o governo brasileiro, que foi um dos, entre aspas, beneficiários das suas denúncias, porque o Glenn mostrou que do celular da Dilma, a diretoria da Petrobras estavam sendo espionados por razões econômicas e mercadológicas.
E a população em geral. I think, well, first of all, as far as Snowden is concerned, so he has asylum technically for 1 year in Russia, which expired 2 days ago. But the Russian government has been very clear that they will continue to give him a form of asylum, whether it's another year or permanent. The chances that the U.S. government will be able to get their hands on Edward Snowden in the foreseeable future is essentially zero. I was just in Moscow, I think 6 to 8 weeks ago, and met with him, and he's doing remarkably well. He walks around Moscow at will. People recognize him sometimes, but not very much. He sort of looks like, this 18-year-old kid who kind of is on his first foreign vacation. And so he's free to do that. And more importantly, he's free to participate in the debate that he helped to trigger around the world. And actually, this is a really important part of this, because the United States government is really afraid of future Edward Snowdens or future Chelsea Mannings, because the way that the United States government stores its data electronically, it's impossible to prevent there from being whistleblowers or leakers. And the only hope that they have to keep what they're doing a secret is to destroy the lives of anybody who comes and reveals it, because they want to intimidate and bully and deter future whistleblowers. And so the fact that Edward Snowden is a free human being who participates in the debate around the world and isn't in an American prison is really important for inspiring future Edward Snowdens. And as far as, the asylum question is concerned, I'll just tell a quick little story. I talked about this morning in an interview I did, and it's actually, it's amusing, but it's also important. I did a debate 2 months ago in Canada with Michael Hayden, who's the former head of the CIA and the NSA. And obviously Michael Hayden doesn't have a very good opinion of Edward Snowden, or of me, but particularly of Edward Snowden. And one of the things the debate does, it's a big debate in Canada, they have it every year, is they always ask one or two people to record a videotape with their own question for the debaters. And the organizers, without telling us, got Edward Snowden to record a 2-minute video asking a question of Michael Hayden. So I was sitting next to General Hayden, just this distance, and we were debating the leaks and the NSA, and he was defending the NSA and talking about how angry he was about these leaks, and all of a sudden there was this enormous television screen that descended from the ceiling, and on the television screen was projected the image of Edward Snowden above General Hayden's head. And then he got to speak and make points and then pose a question to General Hayden, who was then obligated to answer it. And this is really important, this imagery, because it shows that he's become an important voice in the debate and not treated as a criminal or a prisoner. He's considered a hero by people around the world. When I testified before the Brazilian Senate, several senators went over to the students who were aligning the wall and took the Snowden masks they were wearing and wore it themselves, which is an extraordinary thing. And this will help future whistleblowers know that they can do that without having their lives destroyed. But I do think the question of asylum in Brazil is incredibly important, because I do think that every country that has benefited the most from the sacrifice and courage of Edward Snowden has not just the legal obligation, but the moral obligation to stand up and do for him what he has done for all these other countries. And, it is an interesting debate, because everybody knows that both the German government and the Brazilian government benefited greatly from his revelations. It isn't just the spying on Dilma's cell phone or Petrobras or the Ministry of Mines and Energy, but the 2 billion calls and emails and the data from it that the United States collects every day or every month from the Brazilian telecommunication system. The Brazilian government is now able to think about how to develop technologies to protect against that. So the only conceivable reason why the Brazilian government or the German government would refuse to give asylum to Edward Snowden is because they're more afraid of alienating the United States than they are defending the basic rights of this human being who sacrificed so much. And that, I think, is the ongoing debate, and that will be the test.
O Glenn enfrentou uma reação muito tensa e violenta de autoridades de diversos países, inclusive o seu namorado, seu marido Davis, foi preso na Inglaterra, e existem riscos, né, ainda. Tem uma pergunta da plateia perguntando se você teme pela sua família, se você sofreu ameaças concretas desse tipo.
And the United States government, from the very beginning of this reporting, had a strategy of trying to put us, namely the journalists who were working on the story, in fear that if we did the reporting, very bad things would happen to us. If you're a journalist and you say, it's very easy to say, I want to challenge those in power. It's easy to say that. But the nature of doing that means that if you challenge people in power, they can do things back to you. That's what it means to be powerful, is that you can punish those who challenge you and reward those who serve